I have had this person on my bucket list to have on our podcast for ever since we began. And so I'm really thrilled to have Max on the Flower Podcast this week. Welcome, Max. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me. This is exciting.
Well, I know that I have so enjoyed your work, and there's been a few times where I've even sent you DMs where I'm like, what's that anemone, or what's this flower that you're using, because it's product that you don't see every day.
Yeah.
And I think that's the one thing that I appreciate about your eye for design and for nature and for just what you create is I think you see beauty in things that a lot of people just walk right by.
Yeah, I mean, I thank you. I aspire to that for sure. I definitely, it is also, kind of the cornerstone of my branding to seek out, what other folks aren't using, or what other folks aren't using yet anyway. and it's funny how that just doesn't last that long. It's really fleeting. But luckily we're in an industry where every year, season to season, there's new elements or new variations or new varietals surfacing. So
that's great.
They usually save me.
Well, I know that I've never heard your story, so I want to hear, how did you get into the world of flowers?
Yeah. So, way like originally, it really all started in the garden for me. Like that's where I spent all my extra money and all my extra time for a long time. But I fell into it like most people do. I had always had creative inclinations and interests in building a creative life, and tried my hand at quite a few different things. And a friend of mine used to like the flowers I got her for her birthday, and she asked me to do her wedding flowers when they got married.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, it was so, understand though, like I did the flowers, another friend of mine like catered, there was another friend of mine DJ'd. It was
a family affair.
Yeah, it was all love, but it was like, they were in jars. Like my arrangements were in jars and stuff like it, but it was super fun. Like 2 nights in a row, and I just hesitate because I know I've told this story so many times, but 2 nights in a row, like before I knew it, it was 3 a.m. and I hadn't like eaten or peed or smoked a cigarette. I just was so engrossed in, what I would probably cringe to look back on, but it was so fun and compelling. And I had horribly underbought. I had no idea what I was doing. So ended up having to like cut fennel fronds under the freeway at 2 a.m. Like cut stuff from my own garden to make up the difference. And that was like the equivalent of cooking with stuff I had, like vegetables I had grown myself. So it was just really gratifying, really compelling. I was bartending at the time for a substantial amount of my professional life has been in restaurants, so bartending or waiting tables. I mentioned it to a bar customer of mine, and he's like, I got someone you have to meet. And that was Ariella Cesar. So she was actually my introduction to the world of flowers.
Oh my gosh, what a way to start.
Kind of a world-class start. Yeah, it was pretty amazing. And she's still one of my dearest friends. She very generously like invited me in, and you know, I still will call her with questions or concerns, or and she's actually who made me aware of the apprenticeship at Chez Panisse, which is also, you know, had arguably like one of the greatest influences on my brand, or how I sort of define my style.
And so you met her, you took a workshop, or did you just kind of
No, I was like processing flowers and bleaching buckets.
well, was she living in the area where you are now at then?
Yeah,
Because I know she used to live over there.
yeah. I got 1 year, 1 season with her, and then she moved back to Massachusetts, back to the Berkshires.
Wow. Well, what a incredible opportunity. So then
Yeah.
you
Then I
jumped in. Yeah, go ahead.
just then I apprenticed at Chez Panisse for God, like 3 years before Carrie Glenn, my predecessor there, retired, and she had been doing the flowers by the time she retired, I think, for 34 years there. And you know, many would say, myself among them, that she sort of pioneered, you know, stylistically what we associate with like California flowers, and really tried to embody the same principles in her florals that the restaurant had adopted with the food. So it was, again, just out of the gate, it couldn't have been a richer and sort of better tailored experience.
So what was that like to intern for 3 years? That seems like, I mean, was that just you paying your dues? Was it training? Was it, I mean, because that just seems like a long time, but yet a
Yeah.
tremendous opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a slow burn. I'm pretty slow out of the gate for sure. And it was like, that wasn't the only thing I was doing. I was also freelancing elsewhere. I was getting I started to get my own jobs that way. And, you know, she would throw me a bone now and again. And I, in that time, started doing the flowers at the Original Quince, which is a Bay Area destination restaurant. But the original space, not the new space. So it was much smaller, and they were just sort of starting out then. And yeah, so it just, I don't exactly know why I stayed so long. I never got bored of her work. I never stopped learning from her. She also like went to great lengths to like curate the elements she was using for her designs. And she also, the restaurant at that time used to throw like several times a year, like pretty big events, each of which had like a unique theme, each of which she just went all out to design. And that was like a real education in design, like watching her work and seeing what she came up with, and seeing how she accounted for the theme in the flowers, and really like she set a tone in the restaurant overall. So there wasn't there was no time during that I was like, okay, like, and she very suddenly retired. Like it was very abrupt. So I wasn't like anticipating inheriting the account. And that's a whole other story. So it's a whole process sort of, it wasn't like they said, here, now you.
That's what I was going to ask. Did you have to like try out? Did they interview different people to do that, or?
No, they didn't, but it took a good amount of time before I feel like I really, before everybody felt comfortable with me having that position.
Well, I imagine after 34 years, you know, you're following some really big footsteps there, or shoes.
Yeah.
But what an incredible opportunity, nevertheless.
It really was. Yeah, no, it really, really was. And you know, I still love it, or did.
Are they?
Pre-COVID.
I was going to say, with COVID, how has that impacted? I mean, obviously, most of the restaurants closed for a period of time. Are they open back up, or what's going on?
They're doing like food takeout basically, or takeaway. And I don't know when, if I have no idea what's next.
Mm.
So we'll see.
Yeah,
I hope they call me.
yeah, I do too. Well, I feel like that's an interesting opportunity to segue. I know with COVID that's impacted so many people, and I feel like San Francisco and the whole Bay Area was one of those areas that got locked down quickly and pretty extensively for a
Sure.
long period of time.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what's that look like? What's going on? Are you still locked down? Or are things opening back
No,
up?
things are starting to open back up. Um, I think as of April 15th, parameters, they just released the new parameters, and it looks pretty good for the event industry. From what I understand, as of June 15th, it's events are on, sort of no tiers considered. So hopefully that continues. We'll see. I will tell you one thing that happened in the downtime is I got soft. Like I'm out of shape, man. I had really like built up an endurance for the stresses of this industry that I am being kind of abruptly reminded of.
Like
So
jumping in the pool and getting that shock at first when it's
yeah,
cold.
just jump. Yeah. So hopefully I will you know, I'll build those muscles back up again soon.
I know you're looking forward to that just because it'd be nice to be busy again. Did most of your weddings reschedule, or did you have cancellations, or did they just shrink way down to small intimate events? Or
You know, all of those things happened. So
okay.
had some cancellations, some people pushed to this fall. A few optimists hung on to their summer dates this year, so that is cool. So far, so good. And some people pushed to 2022. Some people shrunk it, you know, dialed it way back and had an intimate celebration in their backyards. I don't know. I contracts aside, I refunded non-refundable deposits. There's no rescheduling fees. Like, no, all bets are off. Like, I just tried to accommodate everybody as best I could.
I feel like in the long run, that's really the best way to be. I know that I hear a lot of stories where people are like, yes, but, and maybe I could understand it if maybe you bought containers or props or things that needed to be paid for or something,
Yeah.
that you couldn't return or something. But I feel like, I don't know, every situation is probably different, but if it's easier to not rock the boat by just, understanding it's an unusual time.
Yeah, I mean, and it's one thing, you know, if yeah, this was out of people's control. So, and I've been in the industry long enough that many of the planners are also friends, and I
Right.
can't imagine what like they were sandwiched in between between clients and vendors, in terms of all the contracts and deposits. So anything I could, any small gesture that could help alleviate that a little bit, I was happy to do.
Sure. Well, and that's good too, because I mean, you're actually being very empathetic towards the people who help guide clients your way. And
Well, and the planners are essentially, they're like the real clients actually.
right.
Uh, so yeah, I mean, I will always want to keep my brides happy, but um, I want to keep my planners happier.
Well, and I can, and in an ocean of vendors, when you're juggling all these different kinds of vendors, I'm sure it stands out that you're flexible, understanding, and willing to work with people.
Yeah, yeah. And if I'm 100% honest, there was enough going on anyway during the whole lockdown that I was completely consumed by that. It I was glad to have the time, actually. So
Good for you. Yeah, I understand. So one of the things you mentioned earlier that I know has had to have an influence on your design is you mentioned that this kind of all began with a love for gardening, or
yeah,
working in your garden.
yeah,
So tell us about your garden. Tell us, like, what is it that, I mean, just to kind of back up for some people, you have access to one of the best markets in the world, I think,
absolutely.
in San Francisco.
Absolutely.
So what does someone grow that they can't just easily go grab? I mean, I'm like, how does that influence what you plant or you cultivate?
Yeah, yeah. Well, so as I said, my love for flowers started in the garden. It started by growing them. Um, and in my floral design work, and yes, the San Francisco market, like, you wouldn't think somebody would need to grow something else.
Such a candy store.
It is. I do feel like it's what has kept my work competitive this whole time, is to really be on the hunt for what other people can't get at the flower market. And I've found um, a real resource in local nurseries. And it's been my personal experience that what starts to come into the nursery trade precedes its availability as a cut commercial element by a few years. So if
Yeah.
I'm going to nurseries and grabbing 5-gallon clematis of that, isn't available at market, or if I want like a big gnarl of it, they just don't sell, they don't package those up for you. You can't buy a bunch of that at the flower market. um, the other thing is that you buy a 5-gallon pot, you cut and use, you know, um, the plant of it, and then you've got the root system. So my garden for many years was just sort of like this patchwork of past events.
It's like memory lane.
Exactly. And it wasn't always like stuff. It was like, okay, that's like kind of cool and purple, and I can't get that at the flower market. So, but it's not really like what I want to grow in my garden. So it's had many incarnations. It's looked a lot of different ways. I feel like I'm kind of streamlining it a little bit, and I feel a little less obligated to those 5-gallon root masses than I used to. My neighbors love me because there's always free stuff out in front of my house. Like, free plants are like, there's a regular constant stream of free stuff sitting out on my sidewalk. So
You should have like a disclaimer and say, "You're welcome to take this, but in case I need it in the future, I need your address and phone number."
Yeah, I know where you live. I know it's close. Yeah, so I do think, though, that, as I said, nurseries are like a golden resource, particularly if you want to find stuff that's going to keep your work competitive or interesting, and keep your interest alive. Because some years back, when I first came across like Coco Loco, it's a rose, for example. Um, I completely floored. Like, I was like, what the hell? I gotta have this. I bought 8 plants of it. And it was super special for a couple of years. And now, like, I can order as many stems as I need. That amazing tulip Belle Epoque as well, same thing. Like, it was so like there was just a few stems that were coming into the market every year. and like a few farmers growing it, and now it's much more available, and it's a little less special. It's still beautiful, I still love it, but it's not the same experience for folks, you know. So
Yeah, I do see that. And I know that there's other roses that have come on the market that I won't say take the place of that Coco Loco, but I do think, maybe there's opportunity there. But I don't know. I think with Coco Loco, even though it is much more readily available, I still feel like in lots of parts of the world, it's not as easy to get. Or if it
sure,
is, you're jumping through hoops to get it. So
totally, no, absolutely. I just mean that there's a way that uh, both the nursery trade and the cut flower industry are like working that edge, like they're walking that line every year. So
no, I agree.
for me, you know.
Yeah. Well, and I think too, I know recently I was at this incredible nursery and probably like you, it's when I'm walking through, I feel like the entire time I'm like, I see all these new releases and new plants and new cultivars of things. And I just think, and of course, all I think is cut. I mean, just want to cut it up and, not even the landscape. And I'm like, will these plants ever really, some of them, I feel like they never make it to the cut industry. I feel like they don't make that jump, which really makes me sad in a lot of ways, because I feel like, they're diamonds in the rough almost out there.
Yeah, yeah. Well, again, um, and I understand it, but there's only so much attention any bucket of flowers is going to get at the flower market when the vendors are accountable to hundreds, if not thousands, of buckets of flowers. So some of those things just aren't going to stand up to the kind of treatment they get. That's all there is to it. And even some more common, like nasturtium, for example,
Yes.
it's actually a really strong cut element and continues to grow and move and turn to the light for, God, I don't know, sometimes weeks after you cut it. Wouldn't, like, it's just too fragile. It wouldn't make it, so
Yeah.
um,
And even something like that, I even love just the cut foliage of nasturtiums
mhm.
in design. I mean, the flowers are wonderful, but then that element too is one of those things that I'm like, wish I had more of that in my life. And here in the South, I try growing it, and a lot of times it's great until it gets hot, which is early, and then it just,
Right.
yeah, it's like on life support or something. But it's sad.
I
So
mean, no, people think they can grow anything here, or we can grow anything here, but we have it's a pretty narrow window of like really lovely, and then it just gets hot and dry, you know.
mm. That makes me think. I know we're talking a little bit earlier, but we have so many people who listen on the podcast that are farmers or are wedding designers who maybe don't even realize some of the things that are out there. I'm just wondering, is there anything that you wish you saw more of at the market, or things that you've seen in the nursery that would be really great suggestions for people to grow?
Yeah, I mean, again, uh, I sort of I talked about wood, like shrubby elements, like woody shrub, um like in lieu of branches, mostly for like centerpiece stuff.
Like foliage, are you talking about mostly, or blooms?
Interesting foliage, yes, but also like interesting blooms. Like there's um like a good amount of like Australian natives and New Zealand natives that would fare well in California, and
Mm-hmm.
also are tend to be like good strong cut elements, and also have like some element of interest. So they flower at odd times of year. It's not like necessarily like right now we're inundated with blooming branches, but like that's going to be a sharp cutoff for us after mid-May. Like it's going to be hard to find. So
Right.
some of the elements, like some of those Australian and New Zealand natives are I think great options. I think they're sort of overlooked. And they grow really well here in California as well, and are like water. They don't need that much water, so it's not like a real thirsty element.
Yeah, it's interesting. I had an interview that we released a couple of weeks before we're releasing this episode, and we were chatting with Ed from his business is Southern Ukes, and it's a lot of cold hardy ukes, which of course is not a
Okay.
problem where you're located, but again, it's one of those Australian
Yeah.
products that definitely can push farther north and grow in a lot of different climates. And I think there's probably an incredible variety of plants that fall into that category you just described. So
Yeah, that like are also great for installations, by the way, because they're not as tender. They don't necessarily need to be in water.
right.
And that's like a big plus in our industry.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, there's so many things about your design work that have inspired me, or I see and I'm like, wow. I just often think when I see someone like yourself and the work that you produce, where do you begin? How do you
Hmm.
begin a design like that? Because I feel like there's a lot of times, like I said earlier, most people walk by things that you embrace. And I'm curious, is that where the inspiration begins, or is it, where does that process start for you?
Yeah, it almost always starts um, with one element, like something getting my attention. So very often that's something in the garden that's like having that moment or about to. I was thinking about that this morning, how you can sort of feel it, when it hasn't like maxed out yet, but it's getting ready to, and they like vibrate a little bit with potential or something. It's probably the same thing that the aphids notice right before they descend on it and suck the life out of it. Yeah, what season is it in California right now? It's aphid season. Like it is game on. Like it is an aphid wonderland in my garden right now. But yeah, it very often starts with one element, and then again, I left to my own devices, I really like simple designs. I really like to showcase those elements. So again, very often in the garden, but sometimes it's just a bucket of something beautiful at the flower market, and I'll pick the other elements to complement or contrast that, depending.
Sure, sure.
And I'm a repeat offender for sure. I will run variations on concepts successive years, just depending on when things are peaking in the garden and what I can find to complement that. So if you scroll through my Instagram, you'll be like, oh, what? He tried that again, didn't he?
There's a method to the madness. Well, I mean, I think when something works, then why not embrace it? And I also think so many times, um, many of the elements you work with have such a short season.
Yeah. I will also say too that even if it's the exact same elements, which it very rarely is, like they don't always line up that way year to year.
Sure.
But even if it is, there's still something new to be found in relating them to each other spatially, or um, yeah, there's still some nuance that I find that keeps it interesting for me. So I don't know, it's like an old friend.
I understand. So I'm curious, living where you do, driving down the road, is foraging something that you embrace, or is that something that you
that
are
I
friendly with certain people?
Well, it is illegal here, so
Uh-huh.
not really a context in which it's cool. So there are things that I make allowances for, like blackberry vine. I feel completely like I'll do that in the middle of the day, no problem. If I can tell that people hedge their shrub, then I feel like from here up, I'm helping them maintain that shape. But yeah, foraging really boils down to creating relationships here. Again, there's like no one's gonna call me out if I'm like pulling some weeds out of the sidewalk, which is often something I do. But by and large, it's frowned upon. So
Sure. Well, and I know there's a lot of situations where I cringe when I hear stories, but I also know, like here in Atlanta, that often there are some vacant lots, things like that, where
totally.
it's just, there's some material that will be like, wow, that's really pretty fall color or really pretty whatever. And either that or, for example, you see the bulldozer warming up and it's just going to
Right,
get plowed.
right. Yeah, totally. They're taking that tree down.
Right. Yeah. I need to let it live on either in my garden or in my design work. So
Sure.
yeah. Well, one thing that I feel like in growing a business like yours that uses so many different kinds of products, different kinds of elements, that are so natural and some are fleeting. Do you ever, like when you're planning weddings and things like that, how do you incorporate some of the more unusual elements into your designs, or do you leave room like in your budget just for that kind of thing, or how do you deal with that?
I mean, I would say it's unfortunate how often or how rarely the concept for a particular job aligns with what I actually have access to in my garden.
Mhm.
Um, that was one thing that was lovely about the restaurant, having the restaurant weekly, was that I got to do whatever I wanted. So whatever was happening in my garden really could take center stage. But it's hit or miss. It's different every time. If there's nothing that I have that I can cut, I absolutely am going to the nursery to try to find something. And it's sometimes it's just something for the bridal bouquet.
Oh, sure.
Like now that weddings are sort of the magnitude that they have grown into in my business, I'm hard pressed to grow enough for like centerpieces or something. But it's enough to keep my interest up and my designer's interest up. And that's like one of the funnest thing is providing all my freelancers with stuff they can't get elsewhere. you know yeah, so I have to say it's not as premeditated or planned out as I would like it to be, but I keep trying.
Yeah, well, I understand. And I feel like I don't know, there's part of it that I feel like you almost can't plan for,
Yeah,
but then there's part of it, like that's why I wasn't sure if you just leave room in your budgets for that sort of special thing or a
yeah,
trip to the nursery.
yeah. I mean, so I will say I do work that out, that any cash I drop at the nursery, which is I'll do as much as a week ahead of the wedding, is cash I can't drop at the flower market. So, I mean,
Okay.
very often the way my wedding proposals work is we start one place and then there's a lot of back and forth before everybody's happy with the numbers. So I very often am working backwards from the numbers we end up at. Applying a very standard industry markup to my elements and my materials. That kind of dictates much I can spend.
Sure, sure. Now, do you have full-time employees, or is you're pretty much
Mm,
freelancer?
I mean, I have one or two year-round employees, but
Okay.
I'm all year, um, and the rest of it is freelancers.
Okay. Well, I feel like, especially in your area, I can't imagine there's a shortage of freelancers, is there?
This year there might be.
True.
Yeah, going to be a really busy summer. So there's already dates that I'm like, okay, I'll arm wrestle you for. We're definitely like, we got a couple folks we're tug of warring a couple people for sure. But there's a lot of talent in the Bay Area. There really is, which is why I think why we're all looking for ways to keep our work competitive or set us apart from the pack, if you will. Yeah.
Yeah. How is that? I mean, you just have such an incredible opportunity for product, and I would think that that area would there'd be designers everywhere that are doing weddings and things. Do you feel the pressure from like new people coming up, or do you,
I mean,
how do you view that?
yes and no. I mean, yes, of course I do. And, you know, at the same time, I really do believe that there's enough work to go around. I also, you know, have fought for jobs that I lost, and then learned from who did get the job that I'd actually dodged a bullet. So I try to remember that I do think like we get the work we're meant to get.
I love
Um,
that.
Sometimes it's not a bad thing to lose a job. Um, and you know, in terms of like the influx of new designers, I do think COVID's had a lot of casualties there. Like I think folks have
Mm,
moved on to other pursuits, but beyond whether or not it creates competition for me in the industry, it absolutely is like a, an insurgence of like new creative energy that is vital, I think. um,
I like that.
you know, we all settle into our biases for or against certain things, and that like new blood, that fresh sort of perspective on elements um, is like priceless. So I and again, I mentioned earlier that my introduction to the industry was very um, for me, it was as much about the community of people as it was about the work itself.
Mm,
So I really do try to pay that forward. I really try to be mindful of that and share resources and give people shouts wherever possible, um, and have that sensibility of community in my how I navigate those sort of professional relationships. But it's still hard. Yes, it's still hard, and jealousies happen. And
mm.
at the end of the day, though, we're still all a community, you know.
Yes, indeed, indeed. Well, and I think you're right. I'm glad you mentioned the some of the casualties that have come out of this situation, and I feel like it kind of makes me sad, but at the same time, I'm thankful for the new opportunities that are
Mhm.
happening, and I feel like I can totally see your point and get that that energy is refreshing. I know when I see someone's work that is new to the industry, sometimes I'm just kind of like, wow, I've never thought. I mean, it breathes life into all of
Totally.
us, you
Hmm.
know? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and it's interesting because it's arguably like there's not there's not a lot of new, you know, like arguably there's only so many ways you can put flowers in a vase, um, or ways you can explore or tweak a particular palette. But it's like each, again, it's like, it's the nuance of it. It's like there's like a new twist or a new um, way of navigating the elements that, or putting things together, or a little pop of this or that. That I might, sorry, my battery's going low here. I'm just gonna plug it in there. Sorry.
It's okay.
You
It's
said
all
you could
good.
edit, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so yeah, so there's it's the nuance. It's like a new take on an old concept. It's still refreshing and it's still exciting to see.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, one of the things that I always like to ask at some point in our episode is about advice. Being that you have this perspective, and I'm just curious if there was ever either a piece of advice that someone gave you that meant a lot, or
Mm.
that you would like to make sure gets put out into the universe.
Yeah, I mean, I think you know, I hear a lot of people in my one-on-one sessions, people talk a lot about um, wanting to define their style or their brand.
Sure.
And I think the my feeling about that is that people are kind of already doing that. Like I I just like to encourage people to relax about that a little bit, because um, even if they're like echoing what I'm teaching in the workshop, or in a one-on-one, exactly, it's still coming off their hand, and it still is their work, not mine. And it's again, it's those nuances that um, someone's hand applied to somebody else's technique equals a whole other thing. It's kind of like the whole is more than the sum of the parts kind of thing.
Mhm.
Um, so when people are, and it's so, it can be a little anxiety provoking trying to define yourself in this industry, or define your work or your aesthetic. And I I just like to encourage people to relax, that they're already doing that. And yes, they're going to keep learning and it's going to keep evolving. But if, like, looking back on their own work, you can still see it's theirs, you know, even if they're trying to emulate somebody else, it's still theirs. Like, I can go through the cooler uh, after all the freelancers are done designing for the day, and I know who did which arrangement. Like, I can see, yes, it's sort of a Max Gill design, but I can see them in their work. So I feel like that's always the case. And no matter how much my work changes over the years, I can still see myself in it, you know?
I'm really glad to hear you say that, because I feel like there's times when, as a student, someone takes a person's class and they try to, enact what they're learning,
Hmm.
embody that teacher, and do channel, through their
Yeah.
design work. And I sometimes wonder if people stand back and say, I did this, or in a way, it feeds that imposter syndrome where it's like, no, I'm just copying what someone else did.
Mm.
This didn't come from my own spirit, my own creative mind. It's just me learning a technique, not necessarily giving. I don't know. I don't know how to ask my question, I guess, but I feel like I just wonder sometimes if that's not something that gets communicated. And I loved hearing you say that.
Well, so the other thing that I really try to emphasize in my workshops and my one-on-ones is So this idea of the principles behind the work,
Yes.
that I don't like, I try to encourage people to be unattached to the outcome of what we do that day. Like I know people are kind of paying their money to make a pretty arrangement in a way, but it's more important to me that they see how the principles are at work in what we're doing. And that is something that they can fall back on independent of the elements we're using or independent of the context. So it's really, that's the cornerstone of the work for me. And that is something that you can, like, principles are something you can own and make your own or see it play in what you're already doing. Like, and the principles for me distill down to why something looks good to you, like why something looks finished for you. There are actual principles at play in that. And that's how you own it for yourself, you know? And so that's what I stress in my work with students. And that's also what I like to preach a little bit. Like
You can preach.
it's, well, just that it is a competitive industry as much of a community as we are. And in that effort to define yourself or distinguish yourself from your contemporaries, people can feel a little proprietary over particular elements or vessels or palettes or shapes or what have you. And again, like, I guess it's because I have that background in theater and I can hear my teacher's voice in my head, you know, because in acting, at least in theater, classical theater, everybody's running the same script over and over again. The
Right.
dialogue's the same. It's the same material. But how you choose the intonation patterns or where you put the emphasis or you know, the arc you create, the trajectory, where you, what your beginning, middle, and end is really what distinguishes your work. And given that there's this whole history of people who've come before you running the same lines, um, it becomes sort of a conversation between actors, if you will. And I feel that way about flowers too. Like, even if they're, even if I'm trying to make the exact same arrangement that I made, I can't again, you know, like
Right.
that's just not possible. It's a living element. It's got a life of its own in a way. So um I don't know.
I
I
like that. And I like the idea that to you, the principles are what are paramount when you're teaching a workshop, because I feel like
yeah,
so many times people either overstuff or overbuy to kind of create security in a way.
it does. I've bought some peace of mind myself. I'll tell you that right now.
Well, you just think, you know, the more you know that and practice those principles, then hopefully the more confident you are to not have to do that.
Yeah, no, and but I agree. I agree, and I think that I've certainly seen that that impulse in myself, and I've seen that in my work too. And I think particularly in wedding work, where if ever it's appropriate to have things feel extra abundant, it is in wedding work. But in work for myself, for some of my private clients, I really like to be a little more deliberate about what I'm using and how much of it.
Sure. No, I can totally understand. Do you I'm just curious, when people come to a Max Gill design workshop or a one-on-one, what do you see as a reoccurring pattern as far as what they what are people looking for? And maybe that's
Yeah.
part of what you just answered, but I'm just curious if there's anything else.
Well, I mean, when
Or what do
people,
you maybe even better? Yeah, we can cut that out. But maybe even a better question: when they come to one of your workshops, um, what is it you wish people left with, or like
yeah.
what foundation do you feel like is really needed right now?
Well, again, it's this idea of like, and these are principles not unique to floral design. Um, they're principles that you see at play in painting, photography, choreography, how um, the blocking in a play, so how the actors move on the stage, and how those changing spatial relationships evoke emotion, and how that change creates a trajectory for the audience to follow. So these are the same principles that I'm drawing upon in my floral design, um,
Mm.
that I originally learned studying theater. Um, so, and they are principles that apply to when you're using one element in arrangement, or very simple arrangements like 3 to 4 elements. They also apply to much more complex work for say weddings or editorials. So that, like, I want our time together to be about focusing on not just how to build an arrangement based on these principles, but how to recognize the principles at play and what they're already doing is what I want folks to see. Because 9 times out of 10, when people come to a workshop or to a one-on-one, they listen as I do my demo and I talk their ear off. And then they try it for about 7.5 minutes before they just start doing what they've always been doing already.
Mm.
And I'm fine with that. Like, again, I really want to take the pressure off of these experiences. And I start our conversation with like, hey, you need to marinate on what I'm talking about. Like, this needs to kind of distill down for you. This needs to, like, you need to like recognize this in play in your work or life. You need to like remember little things I said and be like, yeah, okay, I see exactly what he's talking about now. Like, it needs to gel. It's not instantaneous. And it's hard to come into a situation where someone else has picked all the elements
Hmm.
and like completely relearn how you do what very often they've been doing for longer than I have. Like, I get a lot of people who want to just like freshen it up for themselves, or take a new slant on what they've already been doing. So I hope to give them enough information to see how these principles apply to what they're already doing and how they can be used to maybe enrich their experience of their own work, or to take it to a new place maybe.
Yeah, I like that. I love that actually, because I feel like it's interesting your observation about how people fall back after just 7.5 minutes. Um, and start doing what they know. And is that because it's safe? Is it because that's what they genuinely like to begin with? Um,
I think
is
that
it Yeah.
yes is the answer. Like, it's all those things. Like, definitely some of this, like when so there's a point in most one-on-ones where I take my hand to their work a little bit.
Oh, really?
Yeah, like, just to say, never in like in an insistent sort of way, but just like, hey, what if this branch was like, I see you've got this going on here, what if you related a branch right here to that going on? um And certainly some folks who are more used to symmetrical, more traditional work sometimes have a hard time with a branch sticking up right there for some reason. You know, they're just used to seeing this other thing. And again, it takes a little time to kind of open your mind up to a new silhouette. But I also think that, you know, these principles are what I fall back on when I'm nervous. And long gone are the days where I got to enjoy this inquiry in my kitchen, you know, by myself. Like, I now have like people's expectations and sometimes a substantial amount of money on the line, and you know, coordinate planners to please and clients to consider, or I'm working and it's 104 degrees and windy as hell on a hillside. So I'm often defaulting to these principles to just get her done, you know, to get something on the table. And in a way, I think that the context of a workshop is a little nerve-wracking, and I'm watching and I'm standing there while they're working. And I think we just default to what we know, you know. It's just get something going.
No, that's a good point too. You know, especially on a one-to-one, it's kind of like, here, I'm going to teach you something, and oh, no pressure, by the way. Which, you know,
So how's that coming along, huh?
Yeah, yeah. Yes, I'm Max Gill, and I'm looking over your shoulder, so it's okay though. You know, but I feel at the same time though, I know that if I were in that situation, I would want the constructive input, because I mean that's the whole point why you're there,
Yeah.
is to learn. Maybe take your parameters, your box, if you will, and make it bigger, or in the words of Sean Lowe, erase it. You know, you know, just to grow your palette of product and design. So yeah.
I mean, I guess I think that's also what I appreciate about exploring a concept again in a year. Like, if I can get these same elements out of my garden and take my hand to it again, you know, I never walk away from a composition like 100% happy with how it came together.
Really?
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, I can be happy enough, especially especially if I have 25 more to get done. But yeah, no, definitely.
So I wanted to ask, with the issues with product out of Colombia, and I realized, if you know, the restaurants are closed and you're not really doing weddings right now, this may not have impacted you that much, but with the flower shortages that have been mentioned and talked about on social media and stuff, being in the area you're at, I feel like you guys have a real huge buffer for that. And I don't know if that's true or not. Have you felt or seen any of that, or pricing changes or anything?
Well, I mean, and I will also disclaim that I'm not, I don't have too many hard lines about the product I buy. I absolutely am trying to minimize the amount of commercially grown imported elements that I use, but this is a service industry. I have clients to consider and clients' wishes to consider.
Right.
And I'm always thinking of how to minimize my reliance on that kind of stuff. But I also feel like one of my real loyalties is to my vendors at the flower market. And given that we have, we're all working with perishable product, if that stuff, until we're all having the same conversation about sustainably grown and environmentally conscientious practices, they're like losing money on things I don't like. Until that's all one conversation within the community, I'm still supporting them. Like that's still my primary loyalty.
And I can appreciate that, actually, because in a way, you know, again, your place in the country is unique, where there are a lot of growers that do
Totally.
grow year round. So the idea
Yep.
of locally grown is
Totally.
is a buffet compared to some places.
I mean, other places have real weather. Like we don't
Yeah.
have real weather.
But my point is though, is that there are certain vendors that you have relationships with that are there though 52 weeks a year,
Absolutely.
no matter whether you have a wedding this weekend or in a month or in December or
Yep.
whenever. And I can see and appreciate the attitude of supporting them, because those are the people that have your back.
Totally.
And at that point, it's not necessarily about, I don't know, sometimes I always felt like I was part of my customer's team, and it's not necessarily about the product at some point, as it might be you're supporting your friends or the people that support you when you need them to come through. So
yeah,
I can see that.
yeah. I mean, but to answer another part of your question, yes, I have seen it has affected pricing. Yeah. 1750 is the new 950. Like, yeah, flowers are more expensive now than they were, for sure.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's hard. There's nothing in and I had this conversation. I don't think I've mentioned this on air, but I've had this conversation recently with a flower shop owner, and we were just talking about it because they were commenting on pricing. And I said, when you look at our industry as a whole, prices really, as far as flower prices, haven't in general gone up very much over the last 20 years. There are certain products I feel like, yeah, I can say, well, carnations, when I started in this industry back in 1991, might have been 12 cents, and now they're more than that. But
Right.
but a lot of the flowers may be more expensive, but not dramatically, not like gasoline is, for example, or not like labor might be, or minimum wages, or the cost of doing business in general. And I feel like, there's a lot of areas that hasn't happened. And I don't know. I don't know what's all in play right now as much as just basic supply and demand. But there's some interesting days ahead, I feel, for what we do.
Yeah. And I think we're all sort of waiting to see how that plays out. I can't lie that there is a part of me that hopes that that translates into a different sensibility about flowers.
Absolutely.
That embraces a little more imperfection, that embraces again sort of a more like deliberately curated selection of elements, as opposed to just more stuff. And that starts to be like a viable angle for wedding work, as well as for private clients, for private work. But we'll see.
Yeah.
I think people will always want peonies in November. I think that's always gonna be a thing.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Well, I so appreciate your time, and it's just been fun chatting and getting to know you, and I can't wait till we can maybe meet in person someday. That'd be great.
I'd love that. I'd love that. You should come out to the Slow Flower Summit.
I came a couple of years ago. In fact, thank you for mentioning that because you're going to be in this year's summit, correct?
Yes, I am.
And so I don't know what you know detail wise about it, but I know that Deborah has to be so excited to be having a summit again this year.
Yeah, no, it just got pushed back 1 year to the date. So that's cool.
Yeah, that's perfect.
Yeah,
Well,
we're all excited.
and because it's going to be in your backyard practically this year, right? I mean,
I
it's not
mean,
far, is it?
yeah, totally. It's and at like a historic, like epic garden. So it's pretty, it's good stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, again, thank you so much, Max, for being on the Flower Podcast.
Oh, thanks for having me.